let's not touch that. All right, good.
I don't have it up to links, but
Everyone good?
don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone ready? Great. Observation 1 is the resolution analysis. The 8th point is the resolution. The United States federal government should substantially increase military aid to the Republic of Kosovo in order to develop capabilities versus ISIS. These points, the framework, this is the policy right indicated by the word showed in the resolution. We argue this should be evaluated through determining net benefits being where the cost benefit of the plan versus that of any competitive policy option or what status quo. C's point is the effort is contextual if not asked in the PMC. The second argument is the inherency. The first argument is that Kosovo was established in 2009, specifically created its Kosovo Security Forces. The 8th point is that in July 2013, NATO declared that the security forces had reached full operational capacity, which means they are equipped to fulfill all their intended functions. However, the B point is that the KSF is not an army. It's basically just a glorified search and rescue force like the Coast Guard. All they do is do things like search and rescue, dangerous situations, hostages, etc. They are not fulfilling the responsibilities of an army. The second argument is that on March 5th, 2014, the Prime Minister Hashim Thaçi said that the Kosovo Security Force would turn into the Kosovo Armed Forces, KAF, but the efforts have stalled because of a lack of funding and the budget priorities being elsewhere. That's the plan. The United States federal government should substantially increase military aid to the Republic of Kosovo in order to develop capabilities against ISIS by contributing $220 million to develop Kosovo Armed Forces counterterrorism capabilities. We have a text for you. Question?
Yeah, what would be some of the practical material things that those counterterrorism operations would like detail? Like, what would it be?
I mean, we don't specify that, but I would imagine it includes things like training, specific weapons, etc., like vehicles, etc.
Okay.
All based on U.S. strategy. I'll explain that more. Funding enforcement, all means. So obviously the first argument is this funding is enough. The entire total budget of the Kosovo Armed Forces at the moment is about 60 million euros, which means the plan is significant and more than enough to ensure the Kosovo Armed Forces can succeed against ISIS. The second argument is that counterterrorism becomes a priority in a world where we fund the plan because it means a significant portion of Kosovo Armed Forces funding is specifically dedicated towards training for that purpose. Advantage one is ISIS. The first argument is that Kosovo has been plunged into chaos by ISIS in the status quo. The ASA point is that in the past 2 years, 304 Kosovars have gone to ISIS, the highest per capita in Europe. The B point is that extreme clerics have radicalized many large portions of the Kosovar population, creating bases for recruitment. The C point is that 5 ISIS military camps have been identified within Kosovo territory, most of them manned by former members of the Kosovo Liberation Army, which is the group that originally fought for Kosovo's independence. This creates the threat that these kinds of operations could not only spread in Kosovo, but also spread in neighboring countries like Macedonia and Albania. The second argument is that the government is unable to prevent the problem despite the fact that they're aware of it since 2004. The B point is that the failure of security forces is a key point because they're basically trying to fight ISIS with the Coast Guard. Question?
Yeah, so if the forces that previously fought for Kosovo independence, backed by the U.S., are now causing problems, why is it that you would fund another Kosovo military?
Not what happened. The Kosovo Liberation Army did not receive United States funding. Also, the fact that it's affecting is probably an indication that the Army right now is underfunded and you should support the plan. The B point, the links. The first argument is that formal organization is key, and that specifically U.S. training is key. And the second argument is that counterterrorism training specifically, the United States can use its experience in areas like Afghanistan, etc., which means that it's already learned how to combat terrorism, and specifically how to combat groups like ISIS, which means they could effectively train the Kosovo Army, the internals. First and only argument that unchecked ISIS will be able to establish a base in Europe. This means that they'd be able to build up and engage in more attacks in Europe using the ungoverned regions, especially in the north of Kosovo, as a base for further attacks. Our argument is that things like the attacks in Nice and the attacks in Paris become inevitable in a future world where ISIS has a reliable base in ungoverned regions of Europe, which ultimately makes it much easier to strike than having to strike from areas like Iraq, Syria, Libya, etc., which ultimately means that the second argument is this ultimately drives up anti-ISIS sentiment in the West and creates the possibility of future invasion. The impacts. The first argument is that there's more European attacks. Arguments that places like things like Nice and Paris again become inevitable, causes hundreds of thousands of deaths inevitably. The A point is the direct death. The B point is this probably causes xenophobia against Muslims, which is uniquely dehumanizing and leads to laws like the ones banning hijabs, etc. is very bad. And the C point is that more attacks would probably lead to a costly war in the Middle East as European powers decide they need to send ground troops in. Draws other countries in, becomes a millions of death scale conventional war in the Middle East. Advantage 2 is Kosovo recognition. The S point is the unique, the Kosovar government is facing an unprecedented crisis of legitimacy and the status quo. The first argument is that the government is under siege because of a perception that it is engaging in bad deals with Serbia and not defending Kosovar's interests. The ASA point is that a coalition of opposition forces led by the Radical Nationalist Party of Self-Determination is currently fighting to take down the government, and they're succeeding because of the popular support. The BISA point is that recently Issa Mustafa, about a month ago, was pelted with eggs and had to use an umbrella to block himself, which is hilarious. The CISA point is that they've started doing things like releasing tear gas in the parliament as a sign of their disapproval of the current Kosovar our policy towards Serbia and the willingness to accept deals that are bad for Serbia, the Kosovo. The second argument is that the Brussels Agreement is stolen. The ACE point is in April 2013, Kosovo signed the Brussels Agreement, which basically establishes its terms with Serbia for the regulation of the majority Serbs in the north of its country and is the basis for a future peace deal after the war. The B point is that Serbia, however, has not shut down its governance operations in those regions, but shows it's operating in bad faith. The C point is the Serb legal system refused to recognize that as an international treaty, and the D point is that Kosovo cannot pass anything to make this in effect because it's hard to pass laws while you're wearing a gas mask. The third argument is that Serbia's government is moving in the right direction, but very slowly. The pro-European Prime Minister Alexander Vučić won in the April election. However, he is unwilling to do anything to work towards recognition of Kosovo. And the fourth argument is that the Kosovo economy is in crisis and in status quo. The A is you can cross-analyze the poorest in Europe, 2,500 GDP per capita, and 45% of the country is unemployed. The B point is unprecedented brain drain due to the economic circumstances. Tens of thousands of Kosovars are leaving. The C point is that in contrast with other Albanian and Montenegro, Albania, Macedonia, etc., it's not receiving key aid, thus the links. The first argument is that AN is a sign of legitimacy for the government. Argument is that a scenario where the Kosovo armed forces are on their key, they're a sign of the Kosovo pride scenario where the United States is funding it. That gives government new credibility because it's able to secure funding for its military. The second argument is that a plan, at least to modeling by other countries, this ultimately gives the Kosovo government legitimacy to negotiate in the short term and not to have to walk away or do something dramatic to ensure the political survival of the internal links. The first argument is that Serbia would ultimately recognize Kosovo. Our argument is that A, they have $350 million in US aid depending on it. B one is they want to be an EU member, which means they need to please the US and its allies, which means in a world with the US signals direct commitment to Kosovo. No more questions. I'm sorry. Serbia is ultimately going to be. Serbia is ultimately going to have to recognize. The second argument is Russia would join the aid programs because they want to keep Serbian relations. But if Serbia recognizes, there's no obstacle to them trying to help Kosovo. And the third argument is it helps to treat cooperation and reform things like Brussels. The impacts. The first argument is poverty. The argument is that 30% of the Kosovo population is in poverty and 10% lives on less than $1 a day. This ultimately means that in the absence of foreign aid, which Serbia is blocking the status quo, this leads to the worst kinds of dehumanization and death because people are not only able to access medicine and etc., but also their lives are being sacrificed to geopolitics. Ultimately means that in a world of plan we saw massive dehumanization and tens of thousands of deaths with high probability. The second argument is that governance is the internal link to being able to solve ISIS in a world where you cannot come to an agreement within Serbia and Kosovo as to how to govern the northern regions. You can't possibly have a governance structure that can deal with things like terrorist threats and camps. And the third argument is that the Roma are currently stored in refugee camps in terrible conditions throughout Kosovo, manned by the UN. In a world where Kosovo gets more recognition and Serbia stops instructing them, there's more international funding which solves massive dehumanization and death in the camps.
The order will be one off. One off case, and then one off on bottle.
How long is the first off?
Short. The second one's longer.
Hold on a second. One off case, long off on bottom.
Mm-hmm. Anybody not ready? Awesome. The disadvantage of Kosovo's economy, ACE points unique to arguments that Kosovo's economy is on the rise in status quo. The first argument, the Central Bank of Kosovo expects significant growth in the economy in 2016 with projections at 3.7% growth in GDP. The second argument is economic growth in the previous year was 3.5%, which was a higher figure than the IMF estimated in its first initial estimations last year. The third argument is that economics have also cited increase in consumption and investment from the private sector, which constitutes the primary contributing factors for the rise in GDP. Remember, all these arguments take into consideration their uniqueness argument. These arguments are literally from today, which means that in light of all the things happening in Kosovo right now, the economy is still going up in the status quo, which indicates that you should not evaluate their arguments that indicates that Kosovo is in poverty. Yes, that is a snapshot argument. Our argument is that yes, they are poor, but their economy is on the rise within the status quo, which indicates that there is a projection that things are looking up for Kosovo absent U.S. action to status quo. The fourth argument is going to be additionally that Kosovo has experienced 324 billion euros of foreign direct investment last year, which is a twofold increase from 2015, which indicates that within a year it went up 200%, which indicates that even taking into consideration all your uniqueness arguments, that the FDI is still going up now. Additionally, next argument is that Kosovo is also perceived as being capable of resolving their own internal instability in the status quo. The ACE point is that Kosovo just announced they would be deporting an Iranian national who showed to have proven ties to terrorist groups, specifically ISIS. The visa point is that there are only 5 total training camps in all of Kosovo, and they're all in remote areas near Kosovo's border with Albania and Macedonia, which it probably indicates that Kosovo does not have a massive ISIS presence now in the status quo, which indicates that they're in remote areas and there's only 5 camps. Look at other countries like Iraq and Syria. There are way more camps now, which indicates that 5 is actually comparatively not that many. Yeah.
For a country that's nowhere near ISIS's main hard territory, what is the bright line for how many training camps from ISIS they should have before we get worried?
Probably as much as they would when they have enough, like where they are locally.
Yeah.
That will probably signal they.
Next. The C argument is that Kosovo is also reaching out to other countries to solve. Specifically, they've increased formal relationships and diplomatic relationships with the government of Malawi in an effort to promote peace and international security in the region, which indicates that Kosovo is already going on its own way to reach out to countries to help them. The visa point links. The first argument is the plan is a signal of a prolonged conflict with U.S. involvement. Look, this is how it always starts, you all. We always offer to train people first, and the next thing you know, when the training doesn't work, we have to start initiating drone campaigns, drone regimes, and airstrikes. This is literally what happened in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, literally any country in the Middle East you can think of. We always start by training their officials. Look at Mali. We offered to train Mali's military, and the next thing you know, when things went south there, we ended up having to essentially help them solve the Libya conflict and create a no-fly zone there. The second argument indicates that this would be a hotspot. Look what happened after we invaded Afghanistan. There weren't actually that many Taliban people in Iraq when we invaded, but once we invaded, that became a hotspot for terror because it was like, let's kill the infidels and go there, which indicates that they will. This just creates a perception that Kosovo is going to be massively engaged in a massive 10 to 20 year or longer prolonged conflict, which we say tanks foreign investment, foreign direct investment, and private investment as well, which means it collapses their economy. This internally turns the entirety affirmative. There's no way Kosovo can fund their own army absent U.S. support. Look, the $20 million they're giving them is going to run out eventually, which means that at that point, Kosovo's economy has to be stable enough to be able to fund itself and fund its own army. Our argument is that when you create this perception that the U.S. is going to be in there for the next 20 to 30 years helping, this literally just creates the notion that there's going to be another colonial regime and that they're just going to basically be a de facto colony of America. Additionally, though, yes, these are internally the entirety of the advantage and indicates that you have no uniqueness for your scenario because all of our uniqueness post-dates yours and is more predictive and not a snapshot argument. Go to case. First argument is ISIS is fracturing now. First argument here are we will isolate the fact that they have to recruit from other places such as Southeast Asia and Germany indicates that they are fracturing in the Middle East and the status quo. That's why they're branching out because they don't have the sustainable ability to keep getting recruits within the Middle East, which indicates that they're fracturing. Second argument is that key rebels have taken control of the Aleppo region, taking control of the Aleppo region in Syria, which is key to transit and trade within the area, which indicates that ISIS is fracturing because they do not have control of key areas and airports. The second argument here is going to be that ISIS is also, in effect, ISIS reaching out is also fracturing them, which means that as they have to keep recruiting from farther and farther places, this means that this necessarily trades off with their ability to recruit in Kosovo or places such as the Middle East, which indicates that, or North Africa, which indicates that ISIS is actually collapsing now. Additionally, we will isolate that the fact that they keep going to the media and saying we will claim responsibility for this attack probably is indicating that they're crying out for desperation. They're literally just trying to get attention from the world to say, look, we are still a thing, which indicates that this is just a media posturing, which indicates that there is no impact to the affirmative because they're already collapsing in the status quo and the camps are spread out and they're in remote areas. Yeah.
What is the scenario for why ISIS fracturing, become disparate, and becoming separate in like different branches makes it less dangerous rather than more dangerous?
Because remember, ISIS is trying to establish a state. They're trying to establish a caliphate. The way that they're structurally made is not to just have multiple non-state actor groups operating independently. They're trying to have a country, which is why they were trying to take over Syria. So that's not their long-term strategic goal. Next, the critique. Ace of Points, a framework. The role of values is to vote for the team that best performatively and methodologically interrogates the construction of the body politic. One is the definition of body politics is the individual who adopts symbols or groups to construct the significance in politics. This is a question of signification, aka the construction of value of meaning to whose lives value and whose lives value and whose lives don't. The Ace of Point is analyzes first. Body creates spectacles which are interpreted and
by power in ways that create violence against others.
Create spectacles in ways that create what?
Power interprets these signals and then uses it to create violence against others.
Power interprets these signals and then uses it to justify material violence against these people. The third argument is that representations matter. You wouldn't throw liquid on a fire until you knew if it was water or gasoline, which indicates that they are just asking you to pass a policy and then look at the methodological implications of that later. The links, the first argument here is going to be that examining war as a fixed interest is something that can be solved in a vacuum that has a fixed beginning and endpoint, i.e. if we give them the $20 million, we can resolve all of ISIS's problems. We can resolve all these border disputes, creates a flashpoint which justifies imperial regimes of coloniality. Look to WMDs. Look to the fact that we also said that Assad had nerve gas and was going to kill his own people. We always used to justify flashpoints as a justification for colonial regimes to occupy territory. Don't have enough time. The next argument here is that former U.S. negotiator Frank Wishner has said that he was disappointed in Kosovo's government and their ability to regulate their own economy, which indicates that this is a clean instance of how the U.S. Operates in a colonial regime where we can just go and tell everyone that you do not know how to govern yourself. You need Western logic and Western rationality nationality to be imposed upon you, and you need our $20 million worth of intelligence because your intelligence just is not good enough because the way that your body politic has been constructed. The impact is that one, social death. Our argument is that social death describes a process by which individuals are robbed of their agency and of their identity. This is why the way in which the U.S. can say that we can have a nuclear stockpile, but the minute that Iran decides to start nuclear proliferating, we can say that you are irrational and you are bad. This creates a disposable population, which justifies all violence. Look, our argument is going to be that terrorism becomes inevitable in order to this disposable population because that's the way that terrorism is literally fueled, by the fact that people who do not have agency and feel that they have to lash out. Turn the case. Order?
Sorry, I'm just getting my own papers in order.
You wanted the order faster, you shouldn't have read so much now.
It was only too off.
I have 4 pages of
They took away our college minute. It's supposed to be
Wait, is it still recording?
You sure? Okay.
I can open my computer.
Was it pointed the right way during that page?
Yes.
Okay, good.
It records
no,
even.
It's on. This recording's the green light's on
Yeah.
right there.
It's fine. Okay.
The screen will black it out.
Yeah, let's not worry about that.
As long as the green light's on, it's fine.
Okay. I'm gonna go critique, disadvantage, advantage 1, advantage 2. Anyone not ready? No? Alright. Time starts now. First on the critique, our counter role of the battle is that the role of battle should be whoever has the best method for real world change. This is a better role of battle because their role of battle only works in an abstract world. They're not actually looking at the real world. We must look at the material consequences of our actions to bring about how we have to analyze first and interpret later. This type of epistemology is about. We need to look at both the methodology and what we're actually seeing happening in the real world. Yes.
Consequence is key to evaluate the impact of science.
Consequences are key to see the impacts of the sciences. We can't just have always talking about how representation matters and justify balance. We need to look at how these reps are playing out in the real world. This is the best way to look at the round as a whole on links. First, they're talking about awards fixed turn. We are going for long-term insights. We're not treating this as a flashpoint. We're not saying, oh, suddenly ISIS is running. We're going in. We're treating this as a long-term problem. They're not in war right now. We're saying that while they might seem at peace, they're not actually. We're trying to say changes for the long term, which means this entire link turn on this. They're talking about how we're being an imperial regime and colonial. We're not going into Kosovo. All we're doing is sending in money to fund their military that right now they're cutting due to budget cuts says they don't have enough money. Second one, talking about how former U.S. negotiator was disappointed this is a colonial regime. We're just sending them money to help them out because they cannot afford to send their own money. This is not making a colonial regime, quite the opposite, because we're strengthening their military so that they can provide for themselves and do not need any sort of support from the outside, either EU or the United States.
When was the last time that someone funded an army for their colony? Giving them an army.
People don't fund the army for their colony because that would allow the colony to go against the United States. It's proof of the fact that this is not anything of a colonial regime. Yes.
Isn't that how neocolonialism works, though, is that we can basically say we will fund allies and prop up puppet governments to be our friends? Like, isn't that the new way
You
to
have to
fund
win.
it?
It's a puppet government first. It's not.
This is not a puppet government.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not a puppet government. Is that good on me?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, on the impacts, first thing they talk about how social death and agency decreases. First of all, death comes first because death cannot be reversed. This type of agency, any sort of dehumanization, all this can be turned around and fixed in the future through rehumanization and bringing back this agency. Death must come first in the round, and not right now. And we are helping to prevent this overall. We are helping to. They talk about how terrorism will become inevitable, justifying violences. We help to stop this terrorism by preventing them from being able to have the easy recruitment that they have right now. The only way to solve these impacts is to vote for the affirmative team. They bring up how this. Yeah.
They have no alternative.
I was going there.
Sorry.
They have absolutely no alternative for the critique. There's no reason to vote for the nation team because they cannot resolve any of the problems that they have right now. All these serve as a linear disadvantage that they're talking about, but none of it actually stands in the round. As we've linked turned all of it, there's absolutely no reason to vote for the negation team on this critique because they have absolutely nothing standing here, and it does not turn case at all because we have proven that we are not treating this as a flashpoint, but rather as a long-term problem, structural problem that we need to change so that Kosovo can deal with its own problems. Is that good? Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to the disadvantage. First, talking about the uniqueness about how the economy is growing right now. We find the economy is in fact bad. Maybe it grew a tiny bit, but this is not the problem we're addressing right now. As we talk about how our scenario is that in a world in which we don't stop ISIS right now, their economy is going to collapse further, which means all these problems turn straight around. The economy right now, 45% unemployment, even if it's grown, it's still absolutely terrible. And we're talking about a world in which in the future, with these predictive uniqueness, the situation is going to get far worse than we have right now. The status quo without the change of the affirmative team is going to lead to relations decreasing, which means the growth will not be able to solve the problems and will in fact turn around and get absolutely worse. Not right now. So you can see their uniqueness clearly doesn't stand because it doesn't apply to what the affirmative team is talking about. Second uniqueness point, they're talking about how they're deporting people that can deal with their own problem, only 5%. First of all, it is failing. Right now they have the highest per capita rate of people going to join ISIS. It is an ISIS recruitment camp. They're funneling people into a terrorist group. Clearly their system is failing. They're not doing a good job at deporting or any of that. As for only 5 camps, we're not waiting for this problem to get much bigger before we start to solve it. 5 is significantly more than you have per capita anywhere else. And additionally, this base is much closer to Europe, which means they have a much better chance to help send attacks anywhere else. They are based in Iraq and Syria. Obviously, they have more bases there. Yes.
They're training camps, not sleeper cells. One is too many.
They're training camps, not sleeper cells. Thus, one is too many to have because we don't want to train more people, especially near Europe, where we can spread terrorism across more of the world instead of just isolated to Iraq and Syria and Libya. They're talking about how... No, thank you. No more questions until maybe the end. You can see this... They're saying you can reach out to solve. None of this is solved for in the status quo. We're saying specifically right now they do not have enough funding to stop these training camps, to stop people from getting trained and recruited into ISIS within Kosovo. This is the only way to solve it, to allow their own government to be able to deal with the problems they have right now. On the links, first of all, how this would initiate a long conflict, etc. We're not for the United States. We're not bringing in the United States. We're not leading to any of this. All we're doing is giving the money, training a state. We're not training a specific army in the midst of a war. We're giving money to a military so the military can prevent a war from happening, so it can prevent this conflict from getting bigger. They can't simultaneously say that the situation is small and have huge drone strikes. That makes absolutely no sense. We're not going to have drone strikes, and the situation is serious, but not war-level serious. It is the type of, without war, that is still a problem that we need to fix right now. No thank you. As for becoming a hotspot, it's not going to become a hotspot right now, as we find this is the only way to prevent them from getting more recruitment within Kosovo. This is try or die for the affirmative team, because right now in the status quo, we win that any possibility of Kosovo-Serbia cooperation is evaporating right now. This is the only chance to improve relations in the future. Without this type of dramatic new aid, this will all the cooperation will break down, which means more and more terrorism. We win, the internal link to terrorism will rise. This is try or die for the affirmative team, the only hope of changing all this.
Co-op with Serbia is the internal link to foreign direct investment too.
Cooperation with Serbia is the internal link to foreign investment as well. On the internal links, talking about how it collapsed the economy. This is to jumpstart their army. They're not going to have any sort of reliance on us. We're only sending funding that right now their budget can't have to train them initially. Once they're trained, they'll be able to train themselves. Additionally, all this type of thing is non-unique. Their uniqueness, etc., does not co-state ours. We find instead that we're treating a long-term problem. This is the only way to get the internal links of anything else solving any other problems. On advantage one, ISIS. First, they say that ISIS is fracturing. This does not matter. It's still a threat. The fact that it's fracturing and spreading to more places means it's far more dangerous. They talk a second about how the rebels are taking back the level, etc. We need to stop them right now because this is independent of any Middle Eastern impacts. It doesn't matter what's happening in the Middle East. What matters is terrorism is spreading more to Europe, and we need to stop it so we can stop ISIS on all fronts. They're talking about how it's fractional trade-off in Kosovo.
Wait, one more argument. If terrorism spreads to Europe, that means more Western intervention, which keeps...
If terrorism spreads to Europe, that means there's going to be more Western intervention, which means the war heats up, more problems in the Middle East and in Europe as well. Moving back to the third one, the decentralization is much more of a danger because the goals have shifted. They're not just about a caliphate anymore. They're about wreaking havoc and causing chaos like Al-Qaeda, which is far more dangerous. Second of all, fourth, they're growing in North Africa more, thus they're more desperate, etc., causing more problems. Extender links, talking about how this will help to form counterterrorism, make that a priority, as well as provide a formal way for them to be able to fight terrorism. Internal links also extend all these. Without this being checked, the bases in Europe will grow. More attacks will become inevitable, which have more anti-US sentiment, more attacks, thus the impacts, more European deaths, xenophobia, dehumanization, and a long-term possibly one of the biggest impacting around. Extend the entirety of the second advantage. Unique is that right now they have absolutely no legitimacy. We win the internal link to terrorism through this legitimacy. The only way to get it is to stop having the issue between Serbia and Kosovo, extend all the internal links, and pass.
Alright, review the criticism, case, arguments, and the dissent. Everybody ready? On the criticism, extend the argument. There's no alternative. No reason as to why you would vote down the team. You always vote down the argument. You can also extend the only argument that we need. They say that they treat this as a long-term problem. That means that you bite into all of our Mali arguments, especially on Libya, where we said that we ultimately started by training troops and then led to long-term drone strikes and no-fly zones. And even after all of that, we privatized all of their water and energy industries within Libya. Was probably an indication that this becomes a long-term arrangement and is a neo-colonial practice that ultimately links the entirety of the affirmative, because the affirmative is predicated on the fact that Kosovo could ultimately rid itself of ISIS and become a sovereign state, but only in a world where the United States becomes involved. That means that you bite into all of our arguments, not only about the long-term involvement, but that ISIS ultimately ramps up its efforts within Kosovo because they see the infidel within Kosovo and move itself to Kosovo. You did not answer that argument. That is linked to the entirety of the affirmative. Game over. Case. First argument, you say it doesn't matter that ISIS is fracturing now, it's still a threat. You don't understand the fundamental nature of ISIS. You're considering them as Al-Qaeda. ISIS is a caliphate. Well, let me explain what caliphate is to you. It is a religious nation state, a religious nation state. That means that you have to divert resources to the places that you take over. That means when you're in Aleppo, that you have to divert water, medicine, food, and that ISIS is in charge of all that. That's why fracturing is necessarily important, because you do not control any of the uniqueness on this question. In a world where they're necessarily expanding, it might look bad temporarily, but that is actually an indication that that fracturing and collapse is inevitable. The next argument you say is it doesn't matter what happens in the Middle East, it's only in Europe. That's kind of a laughable argument, especially in a world where ISIS is specifically located their caliphate within the Middle East. Our argument's going to be that ultimately actions within the Middle East and how they're interacting within the Middle East is a better indication of what the status of ISIS is as opposed to their outward expansions, because you can see the argument that says that in the status quo they're claiming responsibility for all different attacks, which ultimately shows that they are desperate. But you also concede our recruitment argument that says that the further they recruit, the less that they can recruit within their nation state is probably an indication that ISIS will collapse in the status quo. This is risk analysis in a world where we can prove fracturing. That means that you only risk that the United States gets into Kosovo and would reinvigorate ISIS in the status quo, something that is not happening, which is ultimately would link to the entirety of the affirmative.
Their profits are also down because they don't control as many oil fields as they used to, which indicates that their profits are declining.
Profits are also down because they don't control as many oil fields as they used to. You got to also remember that ISIS has predominantly funds themselves on these types of endeavors where they would necessarily steal oil and other types of resources in a world where that type of funding is down. There is not a unique argument as to how they would necessarily fund this massive uprising within Kosovo. You have various arguments that says that there are only 5 training bases in Kosovo, where there are literally dozens within other countries like Iraq and or Syria or even parts of Turkey, which is probably an indication that Kosovo is not an issue that it is, and you only risk prolif. Yes.
So you talk about how all these problems occur because it is primarily a caliphate, but given that its goals have changed and is more about terrorism across the
time out.
world,
Goals have not changed with ISIS. We will fundamentally contend that is not the case. Any short-term goal changes is only an indication that they're fracturing and that they're weak, and the reasons as to why they're spreading outward. The long-term goal is still caliphate, and it is still to bring people to a central area.
Yeah, even if they do switch their goals, that means they have to change their entire infrastructure to account for a new type of
even if they change their goals, they would have to change their entirety of the infrastructure. It still feeds back into the argument that they're fractured and weak in the status quo. Go to the dissent. Give me anything else on case, right? You are fundamentally behind on all uniqueness questions that would necessarily means that you don't have access to the direction for your link to its own first argument. You say the economy is bad now, and that there's no stopping ISIS because the economy will collapse, and that there's 45% unemployment. You can't have it both ways. If it's that bad now, that means collapse would have inevitably already happened. You do not have a bright line for collapse, or at what point does this Kosovo economy collapse? I think you are straight up just going to prefer Bear's analysis on there's a 3.7% rise in the status quo, and that the International Monetary Fund, mind you, that is primarily controlled by the United States, that Kosovo had a higher growth than what the United States even themselves estimated, was probably an indication that they're necessarily up. But you also can see devastating arguments about foreign investment, that foreign investment necessarily went up 200%, and that there were 324 euros necessarily invested.
That's even in light of lack of KSF.
And that's even in light of lack of KSF property, which probably shows that the international community and Europe will probably necessarily fill the vacuum that you're talking about in the status quo. Additionally, the next argument I need here is that Kosovo is reaching out to Malawi in the status quo, and they're trying to do this on their own. This uniqueness devastates the entirety of your case, because it necessarily shows that Kosovo does not need the United States, that they are taking diplomatic solutions to get allies that are necessarily geographically closer to them in order to help the situation. That in conjunction with the fact that you conceded the argument that U.S. involvement always leads to increased recruitment and increased attacks, probably necessarily necessarily means that the status quo is solving, that in a world where European involvement necessarily is better than U.S. involvement because it does not antagonize ISIS as much as they do. If you grant them that they're right, that ISIS has changed their goals, the U.S. involvement in Kosovo is probably the more ripest place for ISIS to take hold and fundamentalize the goals that they've changed, because it would allow them to say that the infidels here and we need to do something about it. Yes.
So if you're talking about how, if they're turning to Malawi, is Malawi allowing them to turn their current security forces into a proper army?
The argument is that Kosovo is seeking diplomatic relations on their own. You are
But is it
conceding
turning
too many
security forces
arguments
into an
that say the United States involvement is necessarily bad for violence, for PR, and even if you're right that ISIS is trying to change its goals, the only thing U.S. would do would fundamentalize their problem. Our argument is about relations. This is necessarily an answer to the argument that says in the status quo relations would decrease. You do not have uniqueness to that argument in a world where the relations are increasing in the status quo, not only with Europe but other different countries. You also say that there's highest per capita recruitment. That argument's going to be that is an indication of fracturing because they have to recruit all the way in Kosovo, means they can't recruit domestically. Probably a reason as to why this would collapse. The next argument you say that the closer to Europe, that means they'll necessarily be worse. Our argument is going to be that no, our uniqueness arguments subsume your argument there that Europe is necessarily already involved and it's probably better for them to stay in without the United States. You say one training camp is too much. No uniqueness argument for that. There are dozens of training camps all over the Middle East. Probably, if anything, your uniqueness is wrong. These places would have already collapsed with so many training camps. Probably a reason as to why you have no propensity there. You say that there's not enough money to stop this. Again, no uniqueness argument for that. Where is the bright line of money? Especially we concede the argument that $200 million will eventually run out.
$20 million.
$20 million will eventually. Oh shit! Then it's way less than I originally thought it was. Links. You say that the training state you conceded our Mali example on about Libya that necessarily training always leads to escalation. The next argument you say that there's no series that this one eventually proliferate. No warrant to that in a world where we necessarily have a Libya example here where there was what we consider a domestic terrorist government and we try to overthrow. And you're conceding arguments that ISIS is a caliphate form of governance. Probably means that we have uniqueness arguments to say that this is entirely linked to in case you concede the most devastating argument, which is the hotspots argument that says that the perception of a 10 to 20 year reign of the United States necessarily would link to the entirety of the case. Look, if the U.S. is in Kosovo, they see the infidel in Kosovo. They want to go attack the infidel. Right now, they don't have that. It would exacerbate the problem. You have no uniqueness to any of your terms. We win.
The order will be the disadvantage and then the case. With an overview on top. Here's the overview. Here's the DA. First case. All right, cool. This debate comes down to uniqueness. They do not have a single reason why the status quo Kosovo is A, going to collapse, B, why it's incapable of solving with the help of regional allies who it's currently reaching out to right now for support successfully to do what? Counter-terrorism intelligence. They literally have signed a formal diplomatic agreement with Malawi to do the same thing they're after us. They do not have a single solvency argument anywhere on the flow, gut check this, that indicates that that relationship would not be able to resolve the conflict. Also, they don't have any, gut check this, they don't even tell you what the affirmative does. They literally say things like military helicopters and intel. What does this mean? These are the same types of things we always say. We'll help you out. You don't have the ability to fund yourself.
I do it 420.
I gotcha.
The argument that somehow, because the AF is vague, it leads to further involvement is something you asked the POI about, but not addressed in any constructive speech.
I mean, I'm doing impact calculus on the probability of you solving in relationship to our Malawi argument.
If the rebuttal can't impact calc, I don't know what that speech is about.
I don't know either.
Fair. All right. So,
Does anyone know what the rebuttal is about?
all right. Also, on the critique, we've extended an argument that they analyze things in a long-term lens, which indicates that the money that they're giving is not just a short-term thing. They're going to be there for a long time. They even say that Kosovo is at risk of being the next hotspot. If it's the next hotspot, how would you not believe the U.S. would be there for 10 to 15 years? This is what we always do. They've conceded a litany of historical examples. They conceded in Afghanistan. Things weren't so bad when we went in. But what did we do? We first offered to help Afghani security forces. What did we do after that? We were like, oh, that's not enough. We're going to have to do some airstrikes. What did we do after that? Oh, we're going to have to do some corridors for aid. We always start here and we always get to the point of involvement. That is an argument which is conceded in the round. They have no probabilistic reasons why the U.S. would not want to do this. But also, this is a perception argument. They've conceded the argument that it doesn't matter whether or not the U.S. will go in and the infidels will actually show up. It's a question of what things get perceived as by the global community and by ISIS itself, which indicates that the disadvantage will turn the affirmative. We're just winning uniqueness on the disad. Look, they're conceding all these arguments about why even though they don't have an army, their economy is still going up. That means economists and people who are betting on the economy and private investors must not be that worried that all of a sudden these 5 camps are just going to suddenly swarm up and there's going to be like a new rise of ISIS everywhere. These people are not worried about this because it's not a problem. They are also conceding a lot of our arguments on case about why they're fractured. Go to the link arguments. They have conceded, one, our hotspot link. The hotspot link wins us this debate round. They do not have an answer to the fact that this would be perceived as the beginning of Mali, the beginning of Libya, the beginning of Iraq, the beginning of every time historically we have gone in to offer support first, which inevitably leads to those higher things, which means that when they don't have any type of an answer to this, you extend all those arguments. They concede that this turns the case. They also concede the argument that there's a perception, again, that Kosovo can handle the problem on their own. They do not have an answer to this. Do not let the PMR get up and tell you that, oh, they don't have an army. Our uniqueness takes that into consideration, which means that our arguments are post-date theirs, which means that if they don't have a more recent argument for why these Kosovo forces are so important to all this, to diplomacy and solving terrorism, then you would err negative. Go to case.
They don't have a brink. Like, what is too much army? What is too little? What is too much unemployment? What is too little?
Yeah, there's absolutely no brink. If it has the highest levels of unemployment now, we should have seen your impacts happen. We should have seen all these camps just suddenly rise up and take over this horribly impoverished country who can't defend itself. That's obviously not what's happening in the status quo. Additionally, you also can see that the private sector is investing and foreign direct investments also going up. You can extend our FDI link. FDI link wins us this round as well, independently. They do not have an answer to foreign countries do not like the idea that this will be a safe place to invest in a world where the United States has to put $20 million of counterterrorism stuff in there to solve in the short term. This freaks investors out. It means that they'd rather put their money somewhere else, which is not going to be Kosovo, which means that in a world where this happens, we have high probability that Kosovo's economy collapses. They've also conceded a key framing question on this. It doesn't matter if your AF solves, because guess what? $20 million runs out eventually. And in the way of counterterrorism, $20 million doesn't buy you very much, which indicates that after that $20 million is gone from whatever they're spending it on, which again, we don't really know what it is, that means they will have to fund their army themselves. Can they do this? In a world of the status quo, probably, because the economy is rising. In a world post-plan, can they do this? Probably not, because the economy looks really, really risky, and it looks like a really, really bad place to put your money where there's an active civil conflict that the U.S. has assessed they need to go into. Go to the case arguments now. We're going to win the arguments about ISIS being fractured. Look, they just do not have a clear story about ISIS. We tell you that ISIS wants to establish a caliphate. That was their goal. Once they started getting lit up by airstrikes in Syria and Iraq, guess what? That did stop being palatable. Once they lost control of airports, once they lost control of Aleppo, that looks way less likely. So what do they have to do? They have to lash out globally. They have to go, look everyone, we can still create terror. We're still a terror group. Remind everyone of their power. This is what happens when you get desperate for power as a non-state actor. You have to win the media spin game. Otherwise, you have no one looking at you. If you don't have anyone paying attention to you, guess what? You mean nothing, which means that you can't get any recruits. They've also conceded that as ISIS has to extend its recruitment, globally speaking, this trades off with recruitment domestically where they're trying to establish operations, which means that there's no risk of ISIS causing these problems, and we internally vote their advantages.
All right. Theodore is going to be advantage 2 with an overview on bottom, followed by on bottom of advantage 2, followed by the critique, the arguments they try to extend there, and then advantage 1, and then the disad. Everyone ready?
Yes.
You guys good? Start with the responses to Advantage 2. Actually don't, because I'm not sure why they didn't feel the need to make any. Advantage 2 is an independent scenario to the rest of what they are reading in this debate. None of the arguments that they read about the collapse of ISIS right now are responsive to what we are saying here, because the governance scenario that we read, the one that they decided was not important enough to make any answers to in any of their speeches, is an independent reason why, despite any specific statistics about current economic growth, which I will note are a snapshot, the economy is going to collapse in the future because of a collapse in relations with Serbia and the ability to collaborate over governance and the creation of vacuums, which is not only the largest independent impact in the round, it also internally turns anything about ISIS, because a world with no governance in northern Kosovo is a world where you cannot possibly solve for anything that the negative or the affirmative tries to solve for with regards to ISIS. This advantage is completely conceded. You can extend the internal links, the uniqueness. You can extend that there's inevitable crisis of legitimacy, which breaks down the possibility for Serbia and Kosovo to collaborate in the status quo. You can finally extend the impacts, which say that mass poverty is the most probable impact in the round. Poverty, the most important impact in the round, and second, and probably most important, the governance impact, which says that governance is key to ISIS in a world where we do not solve governance in the north of Kosovo. You cannot solve for the issue of ISIS at all, which ultimately means that not answering the scenario denies them access to any possible turn ground on the ISIS scenario, because all of the kinds of U.S. intervention and economic collapse they talk about are probably inevitable in a world where Kosovo collapses because there's no governance in the north. The overview is we control the internal link to the only impact they go for in this round, plus the impact of poverty that we are able to solve 100% because of the independent scenario outweighs anything with ISIS on probability. Means no matter what you believe about the flashpoint of ISIS expanding all over the place and getting new recruits, there's no possibility that that outweighs the poverty that is currently occurring. Nothing they talk about is unique. We win the debate. Go on to the framework. They try to be sneaky and extend a couple of arguments here. First, they say that us calling it a long-term problem probably means the United States is going to be involved. The first argument is long-term problem doesn't mean war. The United States funded long-term economic development in Germany and is funding long-term programs all over the place. Not every long-term program is a war. You should also give me plenty of credence on these arguments.
Point of order.
Yep.
I think that our argument is that you're going to be long-term engaging in counterterrorism, which is perceived as like a war state. So I think that your characterization of it's economically is kind of different than what the initial argument is.
I'm not making an economic argument. All I'm arguing is that your response is too simplistic in the MO, where you're like, you call it long-term, and therefore it must be war.
Okay.
So it is just a response to the MO argument. The second argument in response, again, there's a golden turn to the MO, is that long-term problem does not mean long-term involvement. The United States isolates problems all over the place and says these are long-term, but it doesn't go into invade every single one of them. There's no way you vote for this argument, especially at the point where you give me 100% credence on all of my new responses. Next, they say ISIS is going to ramp up more. There's an argument they make all over the place, but I'll answer it here. The first argument is you have said that ISIS is already probably desperate in the status quo, and you made a new argument in the MO that their profits are drying up, which probably means that in a world where their profits are drying up, they cannot afford to just send more people to Kosovo. It doesn't matter if they wish they could. The fact that Kosovo becomes more desirable and more to the plan doesn't mean that more people are going there, because your own argument says they don't have the funding to do that. It means there's no impact to that argument, plus it's probably not unique in a world. It's the second advantage. On advantage one, you say ISIS wants to be a caliphate. Not anymore. We control top-level framing about what ISIS is doing at the moment. Your only response to the argument that ISIS has become disparate and disconnected is that, oh, that's just part of their plan. They really want to become caliphate in the long term. It actually doesn't matter why they're doing it. You have conceded that it is ultimately a more dangerous form of state, a more dangerous form of terrorist organization in the status quo because it is so spread out, which ultimately means the fact that ISIS is fractured, even if it's not what they want, ultimately makes them a larger threat to the world. That is not an argument you have an answer to. Next, you say that the Middle East is a question that the Middle East controls ISIS status. This is not about ISIS. This is about Kosovo. Argument that you conceded is that the Kosovo branch is at least partially disconnected with these training camps. There's no argument made by the negative as to why the status of these training camps affects anything else. Finally, finally, you've conceded that it's try or die for the affirmative, because in a world where we do not solve governance, everything else becomes inevitable. On the economics disadvantage, you've conceded first that poverty is not being collapsed. The fact that Kosovo is very poor does not mean that its economy should have collapsed already. And second, you have not answered the specific governance scenario as to why it would collapse. Next, you say that Kosovo is getting Malawian support. Too bad you've conceded U.S. expertise is key, and also that relations with Serbia, not with Malawi or any other country, are the key internal links. You say dozens of camps is the bright line, but you don't answer the argument about how being in Europe is key, why 5 camps is probably too many because it leads to backlash in European war. You say 20 million runs out. Conceded argument from the MO that 20 million is enough because we're not trying to create a program, we're trying to jumpstart training for a program that already exists. Next, you say that training always leads to escalation. The first argument is escalation is coming in the status quo, in a world where ISIS continues to get involved in this region, in a world where we don't solve governance, in a world where Kosovo has no control over its northern region. That is probably an inevitable scenario for how the United States is going to become involved in this war. You say there's a perception that... Yeah.
Okay, so the arguments on training are that you train the state and that this will not prolife. The argument you're going for is that this is coming in the SPO. I think that is a brand new recharacterization that the MG makes. There is no argument about this coming in the SPO.
That's the try or die argument that my partner makes a couple lines down. I'll extend that specifically later. But the argument that all of the stuff you guys isolate on the disadvantage is already inevitable because of advantage 2 is something that was very clear out of at least the MG.
Alright.
Specifically, extend the try or die argument, which is what wins us the debate. You have arguments that in a scenario where you decide not to answer any of advantage 2, this makes it impossible for you to win any of the ISIS scenarios because any uniqueness about ISIS not coming right now is relying on the fact that Kosovo will gain control of its northern regions. We win for 2 reasons. One, we come first on probability. No matter what you think is happening on the ISIS debate, the neg does no weighing, which means that our second advantage comes first, but we also control the internal link, and thus the uniqueness for the entire scenario.
Good round. That was fun.
Sure.
Alright, so, thoughts, questions, comments? No one has any questions or comments?